Annotation. Clinkus Cora could not imagine that one day it would be in a mysterious tree town. Here it is very cool, the foliage is unusually beautiful, and the townspeople are very friendly. For many years the inhabitants of the secret city have been using the tears of the dragon to illuminate it, because it is safe and very convenient. But the alarming news is scattering around the city. Barrels with tears of the dragon are almost empty. And now foliage can plunge into unsightly darkness. What to do? Klinkus and his new friends are in a hurry to help. Saved book publishing layout as PDF A4. Alessandro Gatti. The Story of Extinguished Lights. 1. Snowfall of the Century. It was snowing all day. And it was not going to stop at all at night. At 8 in the evening it was already dark and quiet on the snowy streets, and the residents of the city hid in warm houses for a long time. Only an old innkeeper with a flattened nose, wrapped in a fur coat, still wore on the street, closing his institution. Suddenly around the corner there was a terrible rumble. The innkeeper did not even have time to look back, as he was blown from head to toe by a wave of powdery snow. 1,000 chimneys! He agitated. Shaking off snow from his eyebrows, the innkeeper saw a flickering light, and then the whole street flinched, as if under the wheels of a huge car, and a strange unidentified ruin left because of the turn. Most of all, it was like sledging with a motor that roared on the go and rumbled iron through the snow. "Excuse me, please," the driver shouted. The old innkeeper coughed up, again spoiled something and tried to see the dashing. He saw almost nothing because of the snow and darkness, but was almost sure that he discerned a little boy behind the wheel. Motor towers disappeared around the corner as rapidly as they appeared. Completely crazy. The old innkeeper drilled, shook off the snow and entered the empty tavern. The boy who slid through the snow was named Clinkus Cora, and he had never heard his heart beat like that before. Let's! Do not break!" Klinkus shouted. And sledges rattled along soft streets like a carpet, lifting 2 white crumpled fans behind them. And then the road on which the sledges jumped became wider and led to a large area. In the center of the square there was a fountain with an icy stream of water, and behind it Klinkus finally saw the north gate, open, like a spilled mouth, in the very middle of the fortress walls. Cheers! Arrived. The boy was delighted. Sledges flew the last section of the street and rushed under a high black arch, which established the boundaries of the city. Klinkus squeezed the steering wheel, trying to drive as quickly as possible. And then closed his eyes and, above the north gate, which served as the main entrance to Umgrad, a watchtower. At the very top of the tower cracked a fire from dry branches, which painted the shadow of a pointed roof on the snow. 2 guards completely edged and wet due to snow flakes, which with a whistle. "I thought I saw something," said one of the guards, peering into the opening of the city gate. "Something is what?" asked another. "Something that glided through the snow. And, it seems, there was some kind of noise, similar to the wind curl, only louder," added first guard. "Didn't you dream about all this, buddy? In such an evening, even a wolf will not throw his nose out of a warm hole." His comrade grinned. The guards hung out of the loopholes, peering into the dark, but saw only snowflakes that flashed more and more often. I tell you, something rolled down there. And it was rumbling, first guard proved. Come on, let's go warm at the fire. Until they froze at all because of this snow. Another, pause equals 450, answered him. Motor towers flew under the gate and rushed away from the powerful fortress walls. Cheers! I did it! I did it! Klinkus screamed when he opened his eyes again. For a moment, the boy was dizzy, because a huge white desert parted in front of him. Klinkus looked back at the city he had just left, rested in his old coat and inhaled the full lungs of fresh pale air. He broke out of town. He escaped from the workshops, too. Scrap metal cemetery. There was absolute silence in Sir Greylock's workshops. 112 boys recruited from the shelters of Umgrad turned off the machines and reached for a gloomy dining room, weakly lit with candles. Here they were waiting for a blackberry plate of liquid soup and black bread. At dinner, Clinkus Cora often sat